and deliver innovative products and services for new and changing markets. One area that's important there, beyond, of course, technology development that is needed to build resilience and for adaptation, is also looking at the base of the pyramid, looking at innovative products and services that help, in this case then especially poor people, to adapt. As a way of finding new markets for business. And of course, public procurement. We're talking a lot about public finance going into adaptation, and closely linked to public procurement, also opportunities through partnerships there. Public institutions partnering with businesses on adaptation projects. Businesses are often, the private sector is where a lot of the expertise on technology development lies, is the area where also a lot of, for example, critical infrastructure is owned. So there's a very clear case here for partnerships, which again, of course, creates an incentive for business to get involved there, because simply there is business there. There's money to make there. But yeah, and I think that brings me back to some of the issues I raised in my presentation earlier. In order to really enhance those incentives and in order to really drive those incentives, I think there is really also a role to play for the public sector, and especially there is a role for improved engagement and dialogue and a better understanding of the needs, vice versa, and also of how really incentives can be created, how we can really capitalize on some of the opportunities that definitely are there and that business does have an interest in exploring, simply because it does make business sense.
Well, thank you so much, and that's a very important dimension, also recognizing that business, there are many levels, from global, national, local, that we discussed how to make it happen at the very end, at the livelihood level. So I think we can have just a whole week discussing this topic, but let's go back to the floor, and the colleague at the very last row and just a bit in the front, if you can just continue with that.
My name is Koli Rao, representing Agriculture Insurance Company of India. My question is very general. Any of you could respond. Nowadays, agriculture insurance, particularly the weather index insurance, is being seen as a part of the adaptation strategy. My question is basically, what's your take if some of the aid or the grants, international grants coming into the country are being used to subsidize the premium for the resource poor farmers? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very straight shooter question. Please give the thinking, and a bit further here, and then we come here in the front. Please.
My name is Kapil Chaudhary, and I work in a consulting practice across Vietnam and India. My question is for the OECD panelist. I'm curious to know, is there any assessment of the efficiency of fund disbursement from the funding agencies? Is there any measure of how cost and time effectively the funds do make their way to the affected communities, and how much of the funds actually get spent in the process of disbursement? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Transaction cost, I think. Here in the front, please.
Okay, my name is Masood Hossain. I'm representing a Finnish INGO. I'm just wondering, it's not just a question, it's my comment also, wondering when we're talking about adaptation funds, I don't see any representative in the panel from those countries who are actually going to use that fund. That's one thing. Another thing, there is a common perception that we want to integrate ODA into climate fund. And as we know that ODA does not mean only grants, it also means concessional loans. I know some of the developing countries have been great problem with those concessional loans. And this tendency of integrating climate fund into ODA, I think a little bit problematic for those recipient countries, those victim countries, and none of the representatives from those countries are in the panel. So I think it's it should be considered that they should be also represented in this type of panels. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's a valid comment, but at least we have recipient countries on the floor, and then in the audience, I think that's also good. One here, one there. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Navaraj Khatioda. I work for Nepal Development Research Institute. My question is regarding this ODA performance. Thank you very much for this idea. I also agree that we have to look at what went wrong in the past. You mentioned, I think it was Mr. Thomas who mentioned about the good performance, bad performance, and very bad performance of ODA funding in the last 60 or 50 years. So my, attention is towards this very bad performance. So what I think is, if you go upstream of this very bad performance of ODA spending, I think you may end up in a forum like this where the development practitioners or policy makers fail to envision the future gorilla or future bad performance. So, and maybe in that time, maybe it was the black box to them. They didn't know that it is going to fail. So, in your opinion, what was that black box for them which they could not envision? And then maybe we have to look at, we should not make a similar mistake now for the future so that there won't be any future very bad performance of ODA. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. How we learn from the past mistakes, basically. The colleague here, then my colleagues in Samoa, please.
Yes, good morning. My name is Hans Gutmann. I'm a coordinator for the Wetland Alliance, which works in the Mekong region. I have two quick questions. The first one regarding delivery of aid and mentioning earlier about the need to adhere to the principles of the Paris Accord and the Accra Accords. But how does this work in the context where you have countries with very poor governance and where the local governance is very weak? Because it seems to me that these accords reaches down to the national level but not beyond there. And when there is a very poor link between the local level demands and their requirements vis-à-vis what the central level decides, isn't there a clear limit there in what you can achieve with following strictly to the Paris and Accra Accords? And what should practical interventions do on the ground to be able to reach down to the level where it really matters? And we're talking about having impact quickly here in reference to funds being provided. So that's the first general question in terms of aid governance in this here. The second one is about this separation between what is ODA and what is climate change funds. A number of years ago, USAID introduced climate proofing of all of its initiatives, where basically it was an attempt to mainstream that climate change issues were addressed in normal development programs. But we also were brought by Mr. Salim's distinction here between ODA in terms of loans and development, and also the ethical background to the climate change adaptation or climate change financing funding. But how do we deal with that on the ground where we're working, in terms of you're being asked to find ways of mainstreaming, of integrating, of drawing on synergies between ODA and climate change specific issues. At the same time, there is these requirements of reporting on it separately, which by itself increases transaction costs and also potentially misses opportunities where you can enhance normal development aid to be addressing climate change issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Please, Taulela, or the Minister.
Thank you. We haven't raised anything, but let me comment. I think there are some confusions in this discussion of mixing oranges and apples. We are talking here of the climate change financing, where the fast start financing versus the long-term financing. And I think, as you all know, after the Copenhagen Accord, the Spain and Netherlands chair, the committee that deals with the fast start financing and the other long-term financing is chaired by the UK Prime Minister and Ethiopia. So I think the discussion here I did not want to contribute to the confusion, but the concern that we have as a recipient country is the existing mechanism is a failure. Because by the time the recipient countries receive funds to do this climate change adaptation and mitigation, half of it goes to the middle person, and therefore using the existing mechanism is also cost more money. Therefore, the recipient countries not receiving the actual funds that is committed by the donor countries. I think Samoa, we take for example the CHEF 5 that we have attended, and we have done 2 projects, especially in the area of adaptation, where we have already submitted our documents to the CHEF for bilateral. And I think this is probably the mechanism that is preferred. We are not suggesting that this is not, we have to be accountable, transparent, and cost effective. So I think we are trying to take the interest of the donor communities into account, whereby the performance base should be the key to those who have done. In Samoa, whatever the local community can contribute, we ask them to provide materials, whereby the government provide financing for the equipment and also for the labor, and let the local community contribute as part of that partnership between the villages, the government, and the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I think it was very good to put in, again, the recipient country perspective. Colleagues, this is 12:30, but I would like to extend just a few minutes to allow the panel to respond to these questions, if you don't mind. Tamara, there was a specific question on efficiency of disbursement, if you would like to address
Yeah,
it.
there seem to be a couple of questions that relate directly on the efficiency of disbursement. I have to say it's a recognized problem that the OECD has certainly recognized, but there is no measure of disbursement delays. There is work on capacity development to ensure that countries have sufficient capacity to apply for funds, which has been some of the delays in disbursement. And of course, as fund discussions evolve, for example, on the adaptation fund, there are a lot of discussions on how to disperse more rapidly and also how to have direct access for countries. But this is not something that the OECD is measuring. Should I also address the questions from Hans Goodman?
Yes, please, if you have a link to that, please.
So Hans Goodman briefly asked about how do we deal with the PD and AAA in countries with poor governance. And Tom can probably expand on this, but just 3 very quick points. We have principles from the OECD International Network on Conflict and Fragility for engagement in fragile states. And one of the key topics for HLF4, the High-Level Forum on Aid Effectiveness in Busan, is on how you effectively and efficiently apply PD and AAA principles in fragile states. And we also have a new focus on capacity development for enabling environments with a new document coming out November 29th on this topic. And your last question also on mainstreaming on the ground, we also have a guidance on mainstreaming climate change adaptation, which has a whole chapter on the project level.
Thank you so much for covering various topics. I think Thomas could add on that, links pretty much.
Yeah, thank you very much for some very provocative and big questions to answer in just 2 minutes maximum. I mean, in terms of looking back, I think we all will have different views as to what has worked, what has not worked so well, and what's worked really badly. Clearly, what one has learned is that around the issue of ownership of development finance and the shift away from policy conditionality towards engagements which are based on national policy processes. I think that's one of the fundamental points that's behind the whole Paris Declaration